Everyone, I'm Steve Kepp, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. While I know all of us are a bit preoccupied with the presidential race today, one thing that affects millions of us that isn't going to change anytime soon is remote work. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring the future of remote work, gauging the long-term impact on engagement and performance. After a largely successful sprint to adapt, organizations must now find sustainable ways of working remotely for the indefinite future. Have workplace routines, behaviors, and structures kept pace? Can companies find new ways of tapping into how their employees are thinking, feeling, and performing? How are managers coping with such practices as virtual performance reviews? Before we dive into this topic with our panel of experts, we'd like to thank our partner Culture Amp. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Culture Amp is the leading people and culture platform, helping companies take action to improve employee engagement, retention, and performance. Culture Amp works with more than 3,000 culture-first organizations from across the globe to help them connect with employees in real time to understand what matters and to truly develop their people. Now, before we start, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with a link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of this conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. At around 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, business journalist Lydia Dishman, who reports and edits for Fast Company on tech and leadership, and has written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, and the New York Times, among others. Okay, Lydia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Steve said, these are challenging times, and we are grateful that you're decided to spend an hour and a half with us. As Steve said, I am a reporter, and one of the things that I have reported on for a long time are workplace issues. And one of the stats that I follow fairly closely at a nerd level are the Gallup engagement numbers. And what Gallup realized before the pandemic was that worker engagement was holding steady around a third of people not engaged, but or that were engaged. But at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a surge in engagement, and that was kind of interesting, but it didn't last very long. What they're reporting now is since after June, about 54% of workers are not engaged. And that means they're psychologically unattached to the work and the company. These employees are putting in the time, but not the energy and the passion. And not engaged employees typically show up to work and contribute the minimum amount required, as you would imagine. So Gallup's researchers point out that since the engagement is highly related to performance outcomes, even more so in tough times, this unprecedented drop in engaged workers has significant potential performance consequences. So now that we're in month 8, for the most part, of the pandemic here in the US, we're going to talk about what's working to keep workers engaged, what's trending, and more importantly, what we're going to do differently or the same as this uncertainty continues and what we used to consider the new normal is likely not going to be a reality again. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my panelists to introduce themselves. Ellen, why don't we start with you? Tell us about your role and how many people in your organization are currently working remotely.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Ellen Stewart. I lead organizational development at Cargill, which is an agribusiness organization globally, and I'm coming to you from Minneapolis. We have 160,000 employees in 71 countries at Cargill. About 100,000 of those employees are in our manufacturing facilities every day, and 60,000 of those employees are professional workforce who are in and out of our offices. I don't have exact numbers because it's really difficult to track when you have that many, but largely our employees that are not in Asia are working remotely and from their homes at this time. So we have employees in our offices in China and Vietnam, et cetera, where they've had a little bit more success in containing the pandemic socially, and they are back in our offices. Other than that, we've got a lot of people working remote, some volunteer coming in, but it's a bit of a hybrid for us at Cargill.
Yeah, you're not kidding when people say new normal. Michael, why don't we go next to you?
My name is Mike Moriarty. I run global talent acquisition here at Dropbox. I'm based in Austin, Texas, company based in San Francisco. Been here almost 4 years and I'm in Austin the whole time. Excited to talk more about some of the decisions we've made publicly recently of going virtual first in the future work that we've just announced 3 weeks ago. We're about 2,800-ish people, depending on the hour, and spread across not only North America, but also EMEA and APJ as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Pranesh?
Thanks, Lydia. Hi, everyone. My name is Pranesh Anthapur. I'm the VP of HR at Uber, based out of Bay Area, San Francisco. I've been in the company now for 3.5 years. I hope most of you know Uber or used one, either to take a ride or order food. We are around 27,000 FTEs, and we went through a restructuring. And currently we are around 22,000, roughly, give or take, full-time employees around the world. And we have around close to probably 7,000 to 8,000 contract workers that that have various degrees of hours of engagement, in addition to all of our extended third-party BPO operations. So all of them have gone virtual. So it'll be interesting in the coming hour to just kind of discuss my experiences with regard to how we looked at each of those categories. And so thanks for having me on the panel. Looking forward to share and learn.
Thank you. Judith, why don't we go to you next?
Yes, thank you. Judith Almendra, I'm the Global Vice President for Human Capital and for Talent Acquisition at TTEC. We are a global organization delivering consulting technology around customer experience. When this started, everything was for us about people, putting our people first. We have a presence in multiple countries around the world. We have about 55,000 employees, and I would say that about 90% of those are currently working remotely. So about less than 10,000 we have still working on some of our on-site locations, mainly some of our frontline employees. And looking forward to sharing some of our best practices and some of the things that we have learned along the way.
Last but not least, Robert.
Thanks, Lydia. Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Robert Melloy, and I'm with Culture Amp. So my role here at Culture Amp is a senior people scientist, but what that means is that I have a personal background as an organizational psychologist. I partner with our largest enterprise clients throughout what I like to say is their employee feedback journey. So I have kind of a bird's eye perspective over what a lot of our largest companies are doing across North America. But in partnering with them, we talk through designing employee feedback survey strategy. So how to use our software to design tools that are going to get feedback. Timely is probably the most important thing in 2020 and in the COVID era. But also with adaptation for change. And so as it pertains to today's conversation, have been working very extensively with clients around their transition to remote work and also potential transition back to the office where applicable. And so I'm excited, to be here and to talk through the conversation today.
Awesome. Well, we are definitely going to dig into tools later. So you're going to be my go-to person for that. Not to put you on the spot. But I want to start with just communication in general, because since I've been doing these webinars, I've noticed that there's a shift in the way that people are talking about, especially with regards to frequency, how often they're in touch with their teammates, how often supervisors are in touch with their direct reports. So this question is for all of you. What do you see has changed in your organization about the frequency and type of communication that you're currently seeing? Ellen, I'm going to go back to you since we started the round with you.
Sure. I would say in the beginning of the pandemic, we certainly saw a lot more frequent communication from our C-suite. So our CEO was basically doing videos once a week just to kind of let people know what was going on. But we also wanted to make sure that we started to get back to a set of new normal or establish some new practices. So from a corporate perspective, that began less frequently. We did push. It was very natural for us at Cargill, partly because of our culture. Leaders were connecting with their employees. And so we did surveys over the summer, and that really wasn't necessarily the issue, that managers weren't connecting with their employees. It's pretty natural, and it came almost as second nature. We're a highly relationship-oriented organization. We have a value also, Judith mentioned, about putting people first. So I would say in general, our communication flowed naturally, but we did get a lot of comments that our employees really appreciated the authenticity of the communication, because we had gotten a bit formal and you can't be formal in a crisis. And so we've been really pushing to make sure that our communication continues with that set of authenticity, given we have no playbook for what's really going on.
Yeah, and that's what's really fascinating to me, to watch this trend of everyone having to learn to be a little more patient, offer a little more grace, a little more empathy for what was going on in people's backgrounds. And, you know, maybe kids are running through the room, maybe your spouse is on a conference call. Mike, you're nodding your head because I know that you weren't able to be with us for another webinar, but you know, the question is the same for you, but are you noticing that there's less formality in general?
Yeah. Yeah, and I apologize for the last time we didn't have our name, unfortunately. So my son was literally right here a second ago trying to hop his head in front of the screen. So I'm glad I was able to dodge that bullet. But with that said, yeah, I think in the beginning we didn't know. I think from our side, we did the typical happy hours. We did kind of more frequent. We got a lot of feedback that more frequent wasn't actually beneficial. We've actually made a movement as a company to give people more time to do deep work and think about your comms and make sure they're strategic and thoughtful. And the one thing I've gained from this is I think the relationships have actually gotten deeper, because it's kind of personal when you invite someone into your home and your kids are there, to your point, and your dog or your spouse, whatever it might be. And you've really gotten to see people in more vulnerable states. I can admit that for myself. I've had bad mornings where my kids didn't sleep and I'm there at work and I have this hat on because I haven't had a haircut since March. And that's just the reality, right? And so I think that the depth and kind of just genuine nature of our communications have gotten there, but we've made this shift to be more strategic about when we're communicating, how are we communicating, using channels like Slack and other things versus getting on another Zoom call all day. How can we be thoughtful around that and really garner feedback from the team? And it's strategic around each team function, what's going on, business initiative, obviously. But we're really thinking about time zones as well now. And we haven't really launched this yet, but we're thinking about like, what are core working hours? We expect people to kind of just be online, hang out, like get stuff done. And then the other half or 60% of your day, when can you just have some free time just to do your job? And we've gotten a lot of great feedback around teams that are piloting it right now, and we're excited to see it. So that's been the big shift for us. But it's, you know, obviously has its challenges and it's obviously some pros as well.
Yeah, and I can't help but think that the tools with which to communicate are different as well. I mean, I think for the default was to do video calls for a while just because you wanted to see people's faces. But Judith, what are you seeing? Are there more chats, less video, more email?
Yeah, so for us, it was actually, it was interesting because we had a lot of our population. For many, many years, we've been trying to actually move to an at-home environment, but we have to keep everything so secure that our clients actually were not open to that. So we kind of were put in a position where overnight, were a matter of about 3 days, we have to relocate everybody to work from home. And with that, we run into the challenges of communication. We had our team leaders that many of them, 67% of them, come from the floor. It's the first time that they are managing in managerial positions. So it was a little bit challenging for them to understand, okay, how to operate in this work in this work from home environment. Now they cannot, our employees couldn't raise their hand and the team lead would approach them while they are taking calls. So we actually are developing something that is called a virtual neighborhood, where they are communicating. It has chat functionality. We also put together some webinars where they have our team leads, they're called iThrive, where our team leads are given the tools to make sure that they understand the importance of communication, making sure that they are touching base with their employees consistently, because that relationship is so key. From the leadership perspective and more of the corporate communication strategy, I would say similar to Mike, we put a lot of thought in terms of how we were communicating. There was so much uncertainty about job security. We wanted to make sure our people knew that we were doing everything in our power to keep our jobs safe. But I think it was those interactions at the lower levels where we struggled the most. And we have made tons of progress in that area, and our engagement, we are continuously measuring it. We used to measure it once a year, every 2 months. For some organizations, now we're measuring almost real time for people to raise their hand if they are having trouble so we can react quickly.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig into how you're measuring engagement a little bit more, but Pranesh, tell me about Uber's communication. Does anybody use email anymore?
We are an app company. I think it's pretty similar to what some of others have experienced. If I go back to, I was in the COVID steering committee as well. So I saw, we were one of the COVID, I called headwind company. You know, even in Amazon, it's a COVID tailwind company. So our business dropped as soon as people stopped getting out of the houses. The rights business dropped, but the Eats business just picked up so rapidly. So we were not ready for either one. So instantly we had to figure out how do we move our resources for use to one business to help the other business that's going gangbusters. So what we did was, if you observe, if you focus on the question from a communication perspective, I think the formal communication picked up rapidly, and not all of that was good, but it just spiked up like 30% when we did. Our data scientists went in and saw the number of Zoom meetings, 30 to 40% extra. So people didn't any commute, and our hours were starting early and days were ending late, and everyone was trying to get answers. And then over a period that has dropped down, it is still not at a very healthy level. And we should discuss during the session any other tips, and I have some tips too about what we have done. But our informal communication suffered, and informal communications actually impacted more negatively our new hires. So onboarding time is one of those when informal communications really helped. And if I look at the populations, I think the caregiver population was stressed out more than others. No wonder, given all the responsibilities they had, plus all the meetings they need to attend. So we went and quickly tweaked some policy elements to accommodate that. So it's a very interesting question. One could argue that there was actually a communication overload during the initial first 2-3 months at least. Now that world is like 8 months plus into this new world, and everyone has settled down into a rhythm of how to work, we're still figuring it out. I mean, for example, we used to have weekly company all hands. We changed that to once every other week now. That partly it has product rollouts and partly it has Q&As, just as one of the examples. And what we found was managers and leaders are more stressed out because they don't have the informal and physical gathering of their staff, whereas many of the employees are reported pretty okay with the current arrangement. And I'll just make one more point and I stop to see if that's of interest. We measured employees via surveys at the beginning in March, and more recently again in October. And we sort of around work from home, we had specific questions, and we categorized the results into struggling population with remote work, coping, and thriving population. So if I look at March to now, struggling has come down a little bit, coping has increased, and those who are thriving has remained same. So it's interesting. So it just tells me that employees are somehow coping, but not many are saying this is great at this point.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that a lot of that is driven by communication. How much are people talking to each other? How much do they need to be talking to each other? And how much is overload? So, Dr. Melloy, your turn. What what are you seeing across Culture Amp, but also with your outside clients?
Yeah, so Culture Amp, and I could have mentioned before in my intro that we are remote forward right now, which is to say that we may try to have an office presence when COVID is, God willing, resolved. But other than that, right now we are more remote first. And so we've always actually been a pretty remote friendly company, especially in terms of work flexibility. And so it was a relatively smooth transition going fully online in terms of communications. However, when I'm seeing across organizations, in the beginning of March, sort of when COVID really came up and sort of outbroke, our people science team put together a few COVID emergency response kind of survey templates, and we had our clients send them out. And so since March, we've had several million responses. And what we found is in the beginning, the top drivers of employee engagement, so that emotional investment that you were talking about before, Lydia, was really most impacted by leadership communication, leadership visibility, a sense that their decisions are providing a sense of stability and confidence in the organization that it will be resolved through COVID successfully. That I think it's a really important thing to note. And I usually coach that communications should match the rate of change. And so if there's a lot happening, there should be a lot of communications that are sort of making sense of that change. And so to Ellen, to your point earlier, fully resonates with what I've seen across the country, which is large organizations having even weekly organizational meetings. That's what we did at Culture Amp as well. But then there's incremental value to that frequent of communication when things are more stable. So then we slowed down. Most organizations, I think, did as well, but then also picked up around sort of the late summer when social movements arose. There was really a need to communicate through that. So it ebbs and flows. Now we have more communication around the election, things like that. But where at the outset, it was really communication was one of the top drivers of engagement. Now communication, as things have relatively more settled related to COVID, those have dropped off, and now increased is belonging and inclusion. And so communication is now sort of important from a different lens. And Mike, I think this is what, Michael, sorry, I think this is what you were referring to before, which is the communication's definitely getting a little more personalized, but a lot of that is really helpful for making people feel included. So it's less about sense making for the change, organizational change, but now this is going on for an indefinite period of time. So how do we communicate in a way that replicates an office workplace culture?
Well, thank you. You just gave me the perfect segue to the other side of this communications issue, which I know that a lot of companies are struggling with, is collaboration. How are you collaborating or making collaboration work, especially when it can't happen spontaneously like it does, just, sit up and stick your head and holler over the wall and talk to whomever you need to talk to. So you're all nodding your heads, so I know you're all going to chime in on this. How is collaboration working, Mike?
Yeah, I think I'm somewhat lucky. Kind of to Pranesh's point, Dropbox has some tailwinds with this environment and helping companies work remotely. And then recruiting slowed down a bit with the, headwinds of potential revenue. We didn't know, we had a lot of free signups. We didn't know what exactly was going to turn over to annual ARR. So we slowed down pretty aggressively in hiring, which allowed a big team to kind of, I don't need them sitting on their hands. We had to figure it out. So both of those kind of gave us an advantage to say, okay, in recruiting, we are not just recruiters, we're Dropboxers. We can impact the business in multiple different ways. And so we set on these initiatives and went to all our clients and said, how can we help you? And so we had people sitting down doing project manager work for IT. We did HR work. We did exit interviews for HR. We did my favorite stories we had, or two of my favorite stories I'll tell real quick. One guy actually sold $300,000 of ARR as a business development rep in EMEA, learning the product. And then my second favorite, we sponsor some nonprofits for human rights here at Dropbox. And so we were able to help them with their hiring needs. And the benefit of all that is what I was able to do, we have a global team, is strategize and actually say, okay, you have to work with people in different time zones in different cost centers that you've never worked with before. And it's so, like I said, it was very easy for us because we didn't have as much work. And we had some job security. So it was kind of forced, but it was a nice opportunity to kind of challenge the team. You have time, you have deep work. What would you do differently? How can you help these organizations? And then how can you bring that back to our organization? And then just like a forcing function, please make sure there's some distribution across time zones and everything else going into that process. And it's produced a lot of great results. And we've actually had some people transfer to other organizations, which is a good thing, I guess. They'll lose some great recruiters, but it's impactful for the company. But that's what we've kind of did, was kind of mandate that. And over the wall stuff, to your point, as we're picking back up on the recruiting side, probably hasn't happened as much. And it's going to be more, I'm excited to see what others have done, because we're going to have to put some more thought into doing that now that recruiting's picked back up.
Yeah, I got to imagine that one of the key areas to collaborate in is recruiting, because you have to do things like group interviews. So, so how are you handling that across time zones part of this, Ellen?
Yeah, so our organization is all over the world, so we're very used to working across time zones, especially if you have a global job in any capacity, which I personally have had for most of my tenure at Cargill. I've been here for about 11 years. But I would say with the pandemic, we launched Microsoft Teams, for example, in a weekend. It was on the slate, but it really pushed us. We were, a Skype shop. Sorry for anybody who's listening of those products, but Teams allowed us to work far more collaboratively, because we had, we were sunsetting away from that product. But that kind of agility in a company that's 155 years old was quite significant, and the ability to get people moving into doing things more collaboratively. We're also an organization that likes face-to-face, so we are relationship-based. But I was leading a project, for example, to look at our company's culture. We partnered with an outside firm, and we did highly interactive sessions around the world, and did those with about 100 people. And it was great, and nobody had to travel, and they couldn't, but it also showed us that we could work in very different ways and collaborate differently. As this has gone on, I think the big reflection that we've had is that it gets harder. So when things were in flight in, for us, January, February, March, April, May, it was easier because you had already established some things that you were working on. It's the new stuff that's a little bit harder to get started. And working on some other projects these days across all of the organization, it's a little bit tougher because you don't know how distracted people are, and they're tired, and there's a lot of fatigue. But from a collaboration perspective, one of the things that we did was we went back to data that we had about our culture and how we wanted to work. And we're really pushing ourselves to ask the question, what do our customers need? So we're doing design thinking on what collaboration tools do our customers need from us? And then we can translate them to the employee basis. So we've introduced things like HoloLens, where we're going into our plants because our customers expect to see how their products are being made. And we're doing that through leveraging virtual reality. And it pushed us into technology places that we were uncomfortable with, but trying to create different ways than doing things face-to-face. But I really appreciate the fact that we're pushing, what do our customers need? Let's make investments there, and then our employees can take advantage of them.
That's one of the other things that I keep hearing is this acceleration in innovation. It's amazing how a company could sort of think about an initiative or adopting a new tool for months and months and months, and then all of a sudden the pandemic comes and everybody's doing it in 2 weeks. So it can be done. Mountains can be moved. Judith, do you have any best practices for collaborating?
Yes, so very similar to what Ellen was speaking to. We actually are leveraging Microsoft Teams. We actually have to expand our capabilities in Zoom. We usually used to have just a small number of people in Zoom during meetings. So all of a sudden we needed to have thousands and thousands of our employees attending these conversations and making sure that there was collaboration happening that way. Our CEO is very used to traveling around the world. So we have to do, so we're doing virtual roundtables where employees actually can bring their ideas and collaborate and do something that we call proactive solutions. We had to, on our business, we had the fortunate situation in which we actually have been able to partner with a lot of different clients and in the healthcare industry and clients in the government space, where we have experienced a significant growth during this period of time. We normally would recruit in the US about 10 to 15,000 people a year. We have recruited over 40,000 in the last few months. So it stretched our teams so thin that it forced collaboration. I think we have never really brought so many cross-functional teams working together to make this happen. And to your point on innovation, I think it has been amazing to see the acceleration to that. We have launched about 9 different bots because we knew that we didn't have enough humans to make happen what we needed. So it's like, how do we deliver on that? So we needed to leverage technology. So we have introduced bots that allowed our employees to figure out how to set up their equipment when they are at home, how to get technical support, which is one of the most common issues that we have. And it's so frustrating for an employee, especially a new employee. I think Pranesh mentioned, right? It's like as you go through the onboarding process. So our virtual neighborhood, which I mentioned before, it is this 3D virtual environment where you can access human capital, talent acquisition, IT support, legal advice, and just is in one single place. And it gives the employee a way for them to also collaborate with each other in a way that they, honestly, we didn't have the capabilities to do. So, so tons of acceleration. And I think we had tested our technology group and all the different teams across the company, but we have experienced significant growth. And I think it has been, we had all of our communication around breaking silos and making sure that people are not working in just their lane. And I think I have never seen that happen so successfully before. So
necessity is the mother of invention.
100%.
We want to talk more about best practices for collaboration, but before we move on, it is time for station identification.
Hi, everyone. I'd just like to remind anyone joining our webinar in midstream that we're from day one, and we're exploring the future of remote work, gauging the long-term impact on engagement and performance. Our sponsor is Culture Amp. And as a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button, and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the top of the hour. Now back to you, Lydia.
Thank you. You know, I realize that I'm dating myself very heavily when I say station identification. And if there are any millennials or even Gen Zers in the audience, bear with this old Gen Xer who remembers the days when there were only 3 major networks and they would pause at the top of the hour and let you know that you were watching ABC, NBC, or CBS. So that's what that is. Every day is a school day. Now, moving on, Pranesh, best practices for collaboration at your organization.
First of all, Lydia, great to learn station identification. I'm not a millennial, but I didn't know that. I think cross-team collaboration measured low in our surveys, and we went deep into it. And we've done several things that Ellen and Judith actually already quoted. So I'll just quote the ones that we are trying to solve. When we went deeper, we noticed that the cross collaboration is pretty high within the team, whichever we define the team to be. Let's say VP's team. But anytime it had to go across, it was lower. And it had increased during this digital age. That went back for us to conclude that you don't have the informal connections. Like you don't run into general counsel in the hallway and just or AGC and talk through things. You have to make an appointment over Zoom, and then you're prioritized. So you're lacking all the access. So what was cross collaboration between functions is now has to go hierarchical. and come down hierarchical. So that is one of the things that we're trying to solve. And because in our business, in some of the businesses, it's an instant decision making day to day. Hey, the city traffic is increasing, and what sort of incentive should we apply here in this hour? Or we need to quickly onboard our restaurant partners. So I think the innovation, to your point, Lydia, I think innovation is the key. And that comes from different tools. Everyone tries to adopt tools. My own experience is Jamboard. If you haven't used it, you should definitely use it. I was a late adopter, but I love it. So it instantly, I miss in-room facilitating sessions. I love this. And it's very effective, whether with a set of execs or a team of cross-functional people. But Jamboard now gives me the opportunity to gather thoughts within 60 seconds or 2 minutes, and then facilitate a process. So we are focusing on tools like that, and we're trying to kind of popularize those tools in addition to Slack channels or so Jamboard comes to my mind. The other thing that we're adopting is a quicker the old word. So RACI charts in terms of who's a decision maker. Oftentimes it's not clear. So is it marketing? Is it ops heads? Is it HR? So earlier world, it seemed to be somehow getting resolved because of this informal connections. Now it's getting a little bit stuck. So people are spending way more time in trying to understand who makes a decision. So we're trying to be very purposeful in providing the decision-making tool to managers and employees. So and the result is to be seen in terms of was it effective or was it actually worse? And in terms of adaptation and innovation, it's some of the jobs are so hard to do. We have this locations called green light hubs in every city where drivers actually bring the cars a designated time, maybe once a day or once every other day. The cars get inspected by one of the agents or a couple of agents, and to certify it's clean enough. Now you can do it. So we had to quickly switch to virtual way of and train all the drivers in all the countries. It's not very easy. You have to hold your iPhone or iPad, Android, whatever device, under the hood, on the seat, go back now to make sure that the full car is seen. So I tell you, at every step of the way, I think managers were sort of adopting, how do I innovate quickly here and make sure it works? A story that comes to mind in terms of cross-functional collaboration, it's not so much about tools, is when a company is in need and a crisis, I think if you have built the company based on values, people jump in. Our recruiters were the ones who started filling restaurant menus. When overnight, thousands of restaurants wanted to go online on Uber Eats, we had no capacity to onboard them. So our recruiters, our HR folks, your legal folks, they just joined the teams overnight. We were all typing in, menu items and the prices and digitize them. So I think it starts with the values of the company, but it also, I think it behooves on the leaders to create those digital tools and physical tools to enable quicker decision making, and that alone I think helps. It's in a major way, sort of cross-functional collaborations.
Well, I think there's a learning curve to everything in remote work, whether you've been doing it before the pandemic or just started, in February or March. And the tools have a learning curve too. So Robert, I'm coming to you now with this question, which is an outgrowth of the collaboration thing. Is, do you think that, there are things that tools enable that didn't exist before, or are there more challenges sometimes when people don't quite know how to use them, and like Pranesh was saying, don't know who to go to get a decision?
Yeah, so just in general, what we're talking about, cross organization collaboration and cross department collaboration, whatever level you want to look at it. The irony is that we've been more connected online than ever, but yet I still see many organizations suffer from collaboration difficulties. And so one reason that is the case that I've been seeing is that for organizations where there was a lot of change and they were hit hard by COVID, for example, and have had to adjust to remote work and their organization has had to downsize either because their industry was hit or because they're not lean enough to deal with that change. Reductions in force have resulted in increased workloads for the remaining employees, especially if they haven't been adjusted as things have in certain regions stabilized. And so now the work has increased, but with the same amount of people. And so collaboration difficulties, whether they were at a certain level beforehand or not, have increased, and they make that sort of resolving those workloads inefficient. And so it becomes harder for me to do my increased work when now I have to communicate either across global time zones or I can't get a hold of someone because they're virtual. And this is particularly hitting organizations that were traditionally really hierarchical or with a strict chain of command, because now the barrier of virtual work means that I have to wait for somebody to get in contact with somebody very specific. And so in terms of tools, I think tools that Judith described and also Pranesh, they sound like they're really helpful for facilitating some of that and for helping to kind of streamline the collaboration. Tools are only as effective as they are useful and accessible. And so to the extent that people also find difficulty in using that, especially infrastructure for organizations that hadn't anticipated having to move online before, that has been a difficulty. Either VPNs and trying to log into intranets, or for security related employee work, trying to patch in and make sure that everything stays secure. I'm sure Dropbox knows what I'm talking about. And so in terms of internal things that Culture Amp has done as well, our internal research showed that one of the biggest challenges to working across global time zones was the distribution of our positions in those time zones. Michael was mentioning this before, which is to say that if I'm in the East Coast of North America and I need to talk to somebody who's in Australia, we have offices in San Francisco, New York, London, and Melbourne. I have to wait until certain hours of the day to get a hold of that person. So we talked about how distributing some of those job positions can help people get information that they need faster and use tools more effectively. But then also we've designated certain people in our team to be responsible for certain information streams. And so what I mean by that is I might be responsible on my team for filtering and being accountable for understanding the information coming out of our product line that is relevant to the people science group. But that means that it frees up everybody else to parsing through that information. They can concentrate on other things, and we come together and we can summarize, our findings.
Can I piggyback on that real quick? Because I feel like my CEO would get mad at me if I didn't make this point. And I think just overall, Dropbox is trying to solve, we're not just file sync and share anymore, we're the smart workspace. And we think just as a culture, we're inundated with SaaS tools. We're going from Slack to email to this, to that, to that. And so we're trying to find, and again, Microsoft Teams is great. So whatever your solution is, but going to I think there's going to be more of a movement, at least I'm hoping, and a lot of people are probably going to use it, is just a central repository where you can bring all your tools together, where AI will actually help inform and bring you updates that you need or necessary, have quick updates in a central workspace, because I think all of us are just feeling that over inundation of SaaS tools. So I just want to call that out as well. Just more tools isn't always better too, because it's just another tool, another place you got to go, and it can be challenging. So there's companies like ours and others that are trying to solve that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of overwhelm in a lot of different ways happening right now, both externally, internally within companies, and certainly, inside a lot of people's heads. There's burnout is a real thing. Zoom fatigue is a real thing. Yet here we are on Zoom. But, one of the things that you mentioned, Robert, was about, accessibility to certain tools, or getting onto the intranet, or what those connectivity issues can be. And that was another thing that I think stands in the way or facilitates communication and collaboration. Things like hardware, is the employer responsible for providing hardwares, especially since not everybody might have a laptop at home, not everybody has a high-speed internet connection. And then also things like, if I've heard one story about a bad chair, I've heard 100 Somebody's working from bed, somebody's working from their kitchen table, somebody's working from a bar stool. They're killing their backs. So again, what is the employer's responsibility to provide those things to facilitate communication, collaboration, and then ultimately facilitate engagement? And I will take a volunteer on that one to go first.
I can go first, Lydia. That's a great question. I'm sure many companies are doing several things. We identified this one of the initial problems itself. So here's what we did. We allowed worldwide all employees, regardless of the job profile, to bring home their laptop and a large screen monitor if they wanted to. Some of them have 2 large screen monitors. So we allowed the transportation of that. And then we actually, in the second round of wellness, we also allowed employees to bring home their chair, office chair, if they wanted to. And because that's very, very important. There are a lot of long-term bad effects of bad posture and everything. So those 2 come to my mind very quickly. In addition, we actually gave, I think one time, a $500 allowance to use it for, if they wanted to use it for broadband. Wasn't so much of an issue in some countries, but it was a big issue in some other countries. Cairo, for instance, working from home, while we solved the policy side of the equation, it wasn't feasible for them to work from home because of lack of bandwidth. So we kind of gave the allowance there to see if that worked, and it seemed to help in many cases. Now, whether we are completely responsible to replicate Office at home, I don't think we can go that far. But should an employer try to do everything they can to help employees have better environment around them? Definitely yes. The other thing that we did was, many of our agents, when you talk of agents, some work could never be done from home in the previous world because of security reasons, the credit card processing. So we kind of asked them to put a screen and kind of provided for that too in certain cases. So we advocate some sort of a privacy. So again, not fully solved, but some of the things that quickly come to my mind.
Ellen, you had mentioned also some challenges with people working in different countries. And were you saying about the dormitory situation for some of the workers?
Given the breadth of our employee population, it's very vast. So just to give some context, we didn't have a global stance on this because it's really difficult to do in our environment. And so we really worked to empower our local leaders to make those decisions that made sense. And in some countries, things are mandated and others not. So it becomes very much, and I'm seeing lots of head nods, but we had to, in our environment, we have people who are working in India, for example, where they are in our call centers or our transactional environment, and they are working at home, but it's more like a dormitory style environment. So they're at the end of their bed, their child might be next to them. So we've seen the gamut of what working from home really meant. And so as we think about our commitment, and our commitment today is to return to our offices when it's safe to do so. Because we do know that not everyone has the same environment in their home to be able to work successfully.
And Lydia, if I may add to what Ellen just said, we experienced something very similar, particularly in some of our Asian countries, and the Philippines in particular. We have 20,000 employees there. So we have to initially just provide some other accommodations to our employees. We have provided internet stipends and things to help them facilitate that. To be honest, we move computers like everywhere, and anybody that would volunteer to actually transport computers, we actually did that. The chairs wasn't something that initially, I have to admit, came to mind. It was just like, hey, let's just move the computers and the things that they needed. And as we learned more about it and had focus groups, we learned about some of the things that you have expressed. And we have a significant number of our population in several of our international countries in particular. We did a quick survey, and about 50% want to return to the to on-site because they don't feel they have a conducive work environment. And it goes beyond just the equipment that you provide or the desk, right? Is what Ellen was just describing, right? Is their family dynamics and the spaces are smaller than what probably we're used to in some other countries. So so we are looking at that, but with social distancing, now our space, it only lasts for 50% of the capacity, right? So we know we cannot bring everybody back. We have put some huge health and safety measures to make sure that we can do that safely for those that have the desire and there's an opportunity to do that. But I think to Pranesh's point, it's going to be hard to replicate the complete office environment for many of our employees globally.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about just people at the early stage of their career, and they may be living with a number of roommates, or maybe the pandemic has had them going back home to live with their parents. And so those environments aren't conducive either. I mean, it's not quite the same as living in a dormitory situation, but it's not really ideal for getting your best work done. Certainly
That's exactly right.
Not for deep work, as Mike mentioned. But what all else are you seeing and doing at Dropbox, Mike?
I was gonna say the only piece of we're kind of piggybacking off all that, doing those things. I'd say to hit that last point in the head, I was going to mention we had to make the decision where we were going to keep our internship program this year or go fully virtual, and we decided to keep it and switch on a dime and do what we had to do. But then we also quickly realized not all these young kids had opportunities to have access to the internet or their own space, and they really depended on the place that we provide for them during their internship. So we decided to just basically trust folks and said, if you need it and you feel like it's something that would help you and have a better experience, we allowed for them to have a space paid by Dropbox during their internship. And those that didn't. And we saw, I think, like 30% usage. And I thought it was just the right thing to do as a company. To your point, Lydia, and everybody else, it's like, we focus on HBCUs and other opportunities, especially in our internship program. And so we wanted to make sure people had that wonderful experience and we could help them do whatever we can while they're kind of in our care.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because another thing that I keep thinking about are some of the larger companies that offer perks like free snacks and not even just free snacks, but like offer full meals. And what are those people who have come to rely on that kind of a thing, and again, I'm thinking about the younger ones who, they are working 10, 12 hours a day, and they really rely on the company cafeteria to keep them fed and watered. Robert, do you have any insights on that?
You hear me, you maybe see me nodding and maybe smirking. I'm a Zoogler myself, a former Googler in the people analytics program over there. And so do I miss the snacks and do I miss the food and the drink? Yes, I do. I think, it's something that I've talked with my colleagues about a lot, especially just other colleagues in other organizations, friends of mine who are in tech, and maybe Dropbox and Uber can speak to this and the Silicon Valley mentality of it all. But, there's probably two different philosophies there. One is that, yes, this is a part of, our employee experience. This is our value to provide this for you. And by doing so, we hope to get better engagement and work out of you. The other philosophy is potentially that it's compensation. And so by virtue, it's a competitive advantage to be providing this to your employees. And so what happens when they work remote and can't take advantage of it? Their total compensation is now sort of altered or adjusted a little bit. I don't know the right answer to it. I'm sure, there's probably a couple psychological angles that I could take, but I'd be curious what the techies have to say.
I would love to chime on this. Oh, go ahead, Pranesh. You go. I've been going too much.
Okay. No, I mean, we grappled with this. I mean, we know some companies here actually gave either food allowance or actually, I don't know if they actually organized with food to be delivered. But fortunately, we have Uber Eats, so we anyway give monthly credit. So we did not take on the responsibility of who will make sure that you receive food, because it's a ton of complications. I mean, you have to ensure safety, especially onset of coronavirus. People were not even sure, is it okay, and then how much, until we kind of, all the food delivery companies figured out contactless delivery, all of that stuff. So all the safety measures have to be put in. But again, I go back to my early statement. It's hard. It's a hard choice for companies, and I think we drew a line and said, we will support you in chairs and in monitors, laptops, allowance for broadband, but we will not take responsibility for food. That would have been hugely complex for us to manage. But we encourage, for Uber Eats, if either organizations or employees want to leverage that is totally fine, because the restaurants are certified and there's safety protocols in place there.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I'm also a Zoogler, and I'm glad the camera's right here, because I've, since being in tech the last 10 years, I've definitely gained some weight. So, and then I go to Dropbox, where Chef Brian is from Google and like an award-winning chef, and it's kind of ridiculous. The 2-story culinary situation at Dropbox in our headquarters. But we just made the decision about a month ago to go fully remote. So that program and what's being offered is different. And to kind of tell it on the talent brand side and attracting talent, it's really made a shift on what is our value proposition. I think the tagline my talent brand partner told me today is like, people are putting their swag hat on a kombucha tap. Like, they're just solving, like, come in here, check it out. That's our culture. Where it's really the values and what you're trying to solve and those things. And I think companies like ours can get away with it. Now it's going to put some intention around our culture and hiring virtually and making sure there's not only the values with the product. And then you also probably going to want to work virtually most of the time, because that's the company that anyone joined as of a month ago didn't sign up for that. And so there's a bunch of conversations we're having around what that'll be and those things. But all of those perks, we have made a shift, not just against the food though, to shift those perks to kind of be more of a menu, to keep it with the food analogy, I guess, to where they'll kind of meet you where you're at. And so if I'm a I have kids, and so maybe I can spend more of my benefits money now this year on daycare, and I can spend more if I want to rework past and still go into there. And then we're gonna meet you where you're at in life. And I think it's kind of a solution to that point, Robert, of like not having these day-to-day benefits, but like there's other benefits from this future work from home that obviously will be different once the pandemic's gone, that we'll be able to meet you where you're at in life. And my wife is still a Googler, so I still get benefits to a lot of the other things here. So I got a double dip on the food side, but that's a strategic thing that then with my benefits and her benefits, what can we play together to make sure it's the best situation for our family for the next year during this time? So it's an interesting conversation. I think most companies are going to have to address, and I do think we're going to have to proactively think about what we're selling to candidates and what is our value proposition now. And we're going to have to highlight that virtually, because obviously you're going to be interviewing virtually now. You have to be able to walk into our office and see all the cool things. So it's a good challenge ahead of us.
So I would just add, we wouldn't be confused with being a tech company in any capacity, but I do think that one of the threads that I'm hearing that transfers is this idea of individual needs. That is absolutely something that we have had to talk to our leaders about, that it's really not one size fits all, given the dynamic of what type of caregiver you are, elderly parents or children, single people living alone. It's just been very individual. And so we've put a lot of emphasis on getting down to that level of what people need, because I think it's really hard to come up with something that is for everyone. And flexibility of how people come in and out of the office for us is going to be something that we're going to have to grapple with, because we were very much in the office culture, and people, when we surveyed, they want to come back, but they want to come back with flexibility.
Mm-hmm. I would just add that, aligned to what everybody just mentioned, one of the things that we're piloting around benefits is a point system, where instead of actually telling people these are the benefits we have, you give them a certain number of points and they have the ability to actually blend their different options, whether it's, if you're a recent graduate, right? It's maybe you have a high student loan and that's where you want to put your dollars, and that's maybe more important to you versus more PTO. Some people are more, they are looking more for more vacation time, but so it depends on your different needs. You may have different benefits that you're looking for. So it's something that is hard to execute across a large employee population, but we're starting to pilot with a small group of employees to see one, how we executed, what's the reaction, but I think it goes back to those ideas of individualism and what people are looking for and trying to meet our employee needs and make sure that our value proposition resonates with the employees that we're attracting.
Yeah, and I have to believe that all of these things are factoring into productivity and performance. You know, you've got culture, you've got collaboration, you've got communication, and you also have total compensation, 4 C's there. Look at me with the alliteration. I'll be here all day, folks. And so I just, before we go on to the larger Q&A, my personal last question to you is, how are you measuring things like productivity and performance? Have you changed the way that you're measuring engagement? Have you changed even the dreaded annual review? Are there different metrics now? But before we answer that question, I'm going to invite Steve back on real quick.
Thanks to all of you who are participating in the future of remote work, gauging the long-term impact on engagement and performance. And to our sponsor, Culture Amp. At this time, Lydia will be picking out questions from our audience and asking maybe one more of her own. So please keep sending them in.
Thank you. So yeah, let's just tackle this performance metrics question before we go on to the audience Q&A. Is anybody doing anything differently? Are you measuring productivity differently?
A quick one is we dropped our mid-year performance review, which usually runs around August, September, because we realized that there are a lot of stress and anxiety performance, especially related to performance and how is my manager going to measure me. I'm still kind of getting used to the virtual world. So, and given our sort of COVID headwind situation where our metrics were not going to truly reflect the performance. So we dropped it, and that has its own issues, not that it's solved everything. But our final annual review is coming up in Jan-Feb timeframe, and we actually looked at the forms, and the goal is to make it lighten, just lighten the whole process, lighten the process of calibration. So we are more focused on the process side of it to reduce the burden on the manager and the employee, and also we have taken the extra step of reassuring caregivers, because we gave extreme flexibility for them to join calls and not join calls. And then take longer time to hit their goals. So those are the 2 areas we'll be focusing on in terms of when we look at performance, how do we look at performance as such? Mm-hmm. And with regard to productivity, it's self-reported. Productivity is shot up initially and has slightly come down, but we also sort of measure the sales. So there's some areas where metrics are helping us gauge the productivity well. It's been high, there's been no concern. But the concern has been the well-being. What it takes to get to the productivity, we think is not sustainable given the burnout situation. So I just want to quickly share that with the team.
For us, and I would love Robert's thoughts on this, but in terms of measuring engagement for us, we used to do our big annual engagement surveys. We have moved into more ongoing surveys. Every 2 months we were doing that. So our CEO said, we need to really know, like, what's the sentiment of our employee population real time. So we need to have a better feeling for how people are feeling today. Just almost when you go to a restaurant, you have like some of the fast food restaurants have the smiley face or the sad face, right? It's like, can you tell me? So we have a view across all around the globe, like how are they feeling? So we have that in an informal fashion today. We are looking and implementing it in a more formalized way, where we have some 2-3 very basic questions and just kind of like, give me your smiley face. How are you feeling? And are you getting the support that you need? When we look at our hybrid remote workforce, we look at engagement, enablement. Do they have what they need? And economics. So those are the 3 E's that kind of like are the pillars of our strategy. But that's in terms of engagement. Is trying to measure it more real time for us is key. And in terms of productivity, we also we are doing it on a quarterly basis, our annual review or quarterly reviews. We call it just quick check-ins, performance check-ins, but but we just couldn't really like do it during the middle of the summer, right? It was just very tough, I think, for everybody. So we decided to skip that, and we are reinitiating it now, putting a little bit more structure behind it. I think in terms of our contact center environment, we continue to measure the same productivity that's key to our clients. So continuing to measure that. So that didn't really change that much. I think what we have been very cautious about is attendance, right? Now you have a kid at home and there's very, they're in a contact center environment, it used to be very stringent, if you will, you know, in terms of like reliability and attendance and those kind of things. We have to make adjustments to accommodate to the challenges that our employees are facing to make sure that it wasn't impacting their performance rating or it wasn't impacting their bonus or any type of compensation.
Robert, I do want you to tackle this one,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with regard to productivity not necessarily being measured in number of hours your butt is in the chair.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's something that has been heavily impacted by the shift to remote work, which is especially for those organizations that hadn't anticipated having to adapt their performance and productivity measurement management systems to account for that. And so at the beginning, what we found is I'm personally not necessarily a fan of the one time per year performance management cycle. As I mentioned at the beginning, the rate of change should influence the rate of measuring that change. And so as people are going through the pandemic and things might be influencing whether they're productive or not, the measurement of that performance and the evaluation should also reflect the dynamics of that. And so as it pertains to performance and productivity measurement, I find that number one, you can't measure it simply by whether someone is in their chair, just for the same reason that you couldn't necessarily measure it by the hours that someone was in the office. I think what makes the system less biased and more objective are different positive features of a performance management system. And so for those of you who are, thinking about what that looks like, consider when work is remote, it's less visible. It's harder to see, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing by my manager when they're not on the Zoom call with me? And that stresses the importance of collecting performance-related feedback from different sources. And so I encourage you to sort of amend that into your performance management process if you haven't already. Pranesh, you mentioned calibrations before, and definitely the quality of work in the COVID era and what constitutes good performance in the COVID era is surfaced in conversations like calibrations, where different managers can kind of standardize their opinions and their more sort of managerial expert opinions around what constitutes good performance. And so I think that that's wholly important, is to get the evaluators connected to make sure that the performance process is fair. And then I would also say that in terms of measuring productivity, allow employees to let you know who would be the best evaluators of their productivity. So even though you might not be seeing me and whether I'm in my chair 8 hours of my day, other people might be. And to that extent, have them influence some of the feedback that is given to the manager to allow them a more complete view of what that performance looks like and the productivity, and sort of get rid of some of the bias that might be injected by the invisibility of the work.
Yeah, this leads into one of the audience members asking about how much engagement is affected by the tremendous amount of outside events, political, health, and social justice. How do you address these in a divisive environment? This is a challenge. These are challenging conversations. So best practices are welcome. Mike, you want to start?
I don't know if it's best practice, but I was at Google before with Robert, it sounds like. And I was there 4 years ago when the last election happened. And like I said, I'm based in Austin, Texas, and we are a blue bubble in a red state, right? And so I had a lot of people on my team that voted for what the company did not want. And it wasn't necessarily a safe space for them when the whole company sent email down about how upset they were and how they couldn't come to work and those things. And so what we made a conscious effort this year from Dropbox is to have our head of legal, head of people, myself, all the way down. We had a whole cascading comms plan of just like being respectful and then trusting people. If you need time, space, the last couple of days, I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'll admit it, I might not be the only one with CNN on right here next to me. I'm sure some of you do too. It's, you know, we're not ready to do that deep of work. And I think someone asked about deep work. What I mean by that is just like no distractions. Time to simply put your headphone on, whatever it is you need to listen to, or just focus to just sit down and tackle a problem, or just theorize about what problem you're trying to actually solve. You don't really get a lot of that in the office. So we've been very forthcoming with that. And then we're having a town hall tomorrow with our corporate legal team on the elections, talking about things like, I imagine like Uber, like certain propositions that are important to us as a company and things that we're looking at, and been very transparent with that, but trying to just find that middle ground to let people have opinions and create safe spaces for them to discuss that. So we've proactively tried to solve that. And like I said, from at least my experience at Google, I saw that done in a very direct manner where it turned off probably half the company if voting turnouts are replicable of a company size.
Ellen?
I would just, I would add, so we are headquartered out of Minneapolis. So, you know, our neighbor, George Floyd, was part of the epicenter of the world having a different conversation about race, which is both, you know, incredible and about time, in my opinion, but also incredibly sad of what was going on in the world. And so we use those incidents and those opportunities to have conversations about our values and how we could further our efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we have made commitments. We've been public with our employees and public with what's important to us and our values. But I do think that, you know, to the other comments, you need to give people space and grace during this time. It's two words that we use a lot to make sure that we are giving people that space and grace and honoring them individually. Some people it affects tremendously. Some people keep moving on and they have other things that they're dealing with and addressing at this time. But the real push, I would say, that we are trying to do is really talk about mental health and well-being, which I believe is the other pandemic that we're all facing, both personally and then helping others through that process. So I do think that we have to continue to allow people to be vulnerable and offer the support services that we can, and the leadership to understand what people might be going through, and to just ask people if they're doing okay.
Yeah, we have a couple of audience members asking similar questions. You know, we have another here talking about engagement and inclusion seem pretty closely related. Have you added any programs or practices to make sure the current circumstances don't have the effect of being exclusionary? Robert, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so to the broader questions and broader threads through those two questions around how are inclusion and engagement related, and how is engagement itself being affected by sort of global events. What I tend to see globally and what we see in our data globally is that engagement, as we're talking about it in terms of an employee's emotional and psychological kind of investment in the organization and their work and their commitment to the organization, that itself is an important piece to distinguish that commitment, because where COVID has impacted things pretty strongly, makes people uncertain around the sort of security of their job or the security and success of their organization. And so to the extent that people can communicate out and assure them of that security, they should be able to remain more committed. If you want someone to be able to see themselves there in a few years, give them a reason to be able to see themselves there in a few years. But it can also be affected, and this is the most dramatic, by organizations basically playing the long game through COVID to support the employee experience throughout the pandemic. So where the organizations have taken it upon themselves to sort of provide that sense of stability for the employee, you see higher emotional investment, you see higher commitment. So engagement really increases. Now we also see, as Ellen was mentioning, a big impact due to social movements. And so, as I mentioned before, we now see belonging as really becoming one of the top drivers of employee engagement. And one of the benefits of the social movements has been sort of the inspiration for the courage to say, I don't belong here. I don't feel, this doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for people like me. It doesn't work for identities like mine. And get organizations sort of to begin understanding that one of the biggest drivers, one of the biggest things that correlates and indicates whether someone's going to be engaged is the extent to which they feel like they're a part of your organization. So I think, yes, the social movements and global events, even politics right now, as Michael was mentioning, are impacting engagement through a lot of different things, including people's ability to be committed to the organization and whether they feel like they belong there. We just came out, our People Science group came out with a blog post around embracing political discourse in the organization. And should you survey around it? Should you not survey around it? What are the pros and what are the cons? And so you might find that helpful, but certainly something that's relevant to whether employees are how they're kind of experiencing the work right now.
And speaking of, flexibility and space and grace, it's a question for a lot of working parents, how much space and grace their employer allows them. So Stephanie wants to know, are there any recommendations of ways to help employees who are really struggling with the double shift, tackling working from home and trying to handle supporting their kids and families?
We looked at this across our organization. I wish I had a very easy answer, other than more time in the day and ability to sleep more. But I do think we pushed a lot on our current flexible work arrangements, which were very much underutilized in our organization. So not only talking about programmatically what was already available to them, including job share, part-time, flex work, compressed work weeks, all of those things, but also trying to address the environment of whether or not that was acceptable to do. I think to the performance conversation earlier, it's really trying to stress with our managers, it's about output. It's not about the number of hours that you work in the day or the time that you actually do that. With our diverse and global audience, it's hard to say like work during these times. And we even tried something pre-pandemic, like no meeting Mondays, which was really difficult to do in environments where Monday was relative to a lot of different people. But we really started to think about the fact that we have to create an environment where flexibility is acceptable, that it's okay, that we're willing to help each other out as a team. And we, again, go back to values. That's about putting people first and making sure that we're meeting them individually where they are.
If I may just add to what, sorry.
Right.
What I was just going to say, if I may just add something that we actually did, I think that's so key. We found that a lot of our employees were not very comfortable seeing how much work we had in our hands, not very comfortable about saying, hey, I need time out, or they felt like they were going to put a lot of extra work in their colleagues, and they were trying to be conscious of that. So I think it's building that culture and making sure that people understand it's okay. So we launched a campaign that is called It's Okay, We Are All Human. And in that campaign, it just highlights different scenarios that we all live through and are going through, and that our executives are going through in their homes as well, and people across the company. And that also link back to our employee and our mental health programs, and in places where we can actually provide a safe place for people to actually just voice what they are going through, and providing more of that. So we doubled the number of sessions that employees had the opportunity to access. So I think it's also a little bit about creating that environment and making sure that people are comfortable. So for us, we have to make a conscious effort and communication around that for our managers and our employees to know that it's okay, we're all human, right? And we're all going through this together.
This is one quick follow that on the two questions. One is on the external factors influencing the engagement. We looked at them as leader responsibility, not necessarily direct manager responsibility, because the conversations had to be had at a corporate level, and extreme empathy helped in that situation. Whereas for caregivers and the flexibility, we made that more of a manager responsibility than even an employee responsibility, because you tell employees you have flexibility, it doesn't work unless managers are able to accommodate their work. And so we draw extreme empathy from manager perspective. Net of this was also that we identified we were holding managers accountable for so many things. We were making managers' job very difficult. So presently, we're looking at how do we redesign managers' role. Are we expecting way too much of managers who are the most stressed population in this environment? If we just tell them be flexible, but don't guide them through how do they hit their goals, then we are not helping them. So challenge to be solved, but I think that's how we are trying to organize conversations on what's the leader conversation, what's the manager responsibility, what's the employee responsibility. But I think driving empathy, listening to them, asking, are you okay, is helping a lot of reduce the stress of caregivers who, in our 3 surveys, hasn't gotten any worse. It's actually gotten slightly better in terms of work from home and caregiver responsibility. So which is a good thing from based on what we're doing. It's helping, but it is still a very stressful environment for caregivers and their managers. That's how we're trying to solve it.
And I'll just piggyback one quick thing. I think, as a dad of 2 kids under 5 and not having any daycare, my wife's a full-time employee as well. I had certain hours where I could work and she had certain hours where she could work, and that's all we could do. And we let the company know, and I put people in places when I could. And I was teacher in the morning and then Mike Dropboxer in the afternoon and sometimes late. But Dropbox did try to meet us. They're helping us some benefits as far as paying for care and reimbursing for care and other things. But I do think, kind of Pranesh's point, the example needs to be set from the top down. So I was fortunate, I guess, in this case, that I was fortunate in that situation and it created that space for everybody. But also our CEO, who's not a father yet, but he, we have one day a month where the whole company is on PTO. And it's incredible versus normal PTO because your company's still going and you come back to 150 emails when you're on PTO. When the whole company is off, you actually come back to an empty inbox, and it's actually quite wonderful. We actually have the week before Thanksgiving off as a whole company as well. And then the last piece I'll plug, which is really nice, is our IT came together and said, Mike, I was on this project because they know when I am on PTO, I still check my phone all day because I'm that person. You can select unplugged PTO where it'll take it off your phone. And you have to then proactively go to your computer and open your laptop if you want to check your email. And it's been nice. And I was scared out of my mind. But again, it was a push from leadership that we had to show that this is important. Nothing burned down, nothing happened. I was very uncomfortable for me, but I'm also very excited to do it for my next time off because I was actually, the first day, like anything, I was a little weary. But then it just became like anything, and I could spend more like present time with my family and actually enjoy paid time off and actually recharge. So those are things that Dropbox has solved that I recommend if your company can do. It's been actually really well received.
Yeah, I think that was the conversation around a trend several years ago that was gaining some traction with the unlimited vacation. And it was like, you can offer this, but if you don't model actually taking the time off, then no one is actually going to take any vacation, much less the 2 weeks. That's pretty standard practice in most companies. But, in the vein of benefits and also recognition, we have a couple of questions from different attendees asking about recognition in a virtual environment. One is asking about the holidays. How do you recognize that? Another one is saying engagement from a recognition standpoint. You may have bought sweets for a birthday or when somebody hit company goals. So how are you doing the recognition thing now in a virtual environment?
One quick plug, and I promise I won't talk anymore, but I would say just on the recruiting side, for all your people who are recruiting, one thing we shifted to, and I stole this from Matt Stevenson at Plaid, we normally give swag to candidates when they reach a certain stage. We've changed to a donation in their name to a charity of like we've pre-selected. We've gotten a lot of buy-in from that. So something to think about from your candidates as far as like, as opposed to, because obviously swag's not going to be a piece anymore. But we've just to address that piece. And then on the other side, we've moved to more values driven. I'm in recruiting function. Recruiting is very similar to sales. We have numbers to hit. We've moved away from those metrics on those pieces and moved more to like storytelling. And we're recognizing the things we want. So we actually give an award out every quarter, the person who had the biggest screw up, who tried something so great and took a huge leap and fell on their face. And they're going to share that with all of us. And I've won that award before and happy to and continue to, probably why I'm in this job. But I think those are the types of things we get to now reimagine and share and drive the culture that we want in this new environment. And it's less about what we found, is it's less about the money that we used to give. It's really just the recognition from leadership is really what people want.
Yeah, regardless, I guess if you fell flat on an initiative, but you're still getting the spotlight shined on you, that's something. So anyone else have recognition initiatives, virtual?
I mean, like everything has gone virtual, even recognition has sort of gone virtual too. I mean, we have, you can recognize the badges. We have this system where against their names, you can go put a badge. If somebody helped you with regard to project, you can pick, collaboration badge. If somebody's done, their anniversaries, there's automatic badge for them. So there is a call out of those badges, not at the highest level, but at least the department levels. What we're also trying to encourage the company is, given the digital environment, which is more official than you desire, we are now saying, take some time in your meeting schedules for two things. One is just check in. So if you have a 30-minute meeting, just take 5 minutes, do a quick check-in. How are we all feeling today? Like yesterday, for instance, no one wanted to talk anything about work or the elections. So we allowed that. But we're also saying, take a couple of minutes to recognize. And recognition can be, we give a drop-down menu. Could be, tenure, could be something extraordinary they've done. I don't think we have perfected it, I'll be honest. I don't think we've perfected it yet. I think there's room. Most organizations tend to use this tool very less than they should, because it's such an easy thing to do. And we're also trying to drive the concept of appreciation versus recognition. If we're trying to see if that helps. Appreciation is for the effort you put in. Recognition is for the results you achieved. Sometimes you put efforts and you haven't achieved results. So some managers will always wait, or they haven't done anything extraordinary, so I won't recognize them. We're saying, no, just start appreciating their efforts and for who they are. Again, at the initial stages, we can't claim victory yet.
Yeah, that's so important. In the last couple of minutes that we have here, I do want to address Lois's question, which I think is important. We are a social service organization and we run 24/7 shelters. I have the difficulty of scheduling trainings around 3 shifts and it makes gatherings difficult. We can't give a day off to everyone 1 day a month, as staff need to be at the shelters. Do you have suggestions about what we can do to ensure staff aren't burned out? And I think that this is sort of a greater question is, what are some best practices to make sure that your staff, your teams, the organization as a whole isn't burning out? Just let's go around quick and do like a speed round, if you will, on this one. Robert, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So outside of Culture Amp, I do a lot of research on care work and emotional labor. And so this sounds like it's a similar industry, and there's a lot of care work, of course, that you're working in a homeless shelter and domestic violence. And so in terms of like ways to avoid burnout, I always recommend having structured formal debriefs. So at the beginnings of shifts, pre-briefs, at the ends of shifts, debriefs, what worked, what didn't work, what were sort of even just an opportunity to have catharsis with your colleagues who understand the nature of the work that you're performing and you're going through together, gives everybody a sense of shared experience that I think can be protective against burnout. And then the other thing that I would say is sort of, to the extent that you're able, the distribution of emotional labor can be helpful. And what I mean by that is, are the more emotional aspects of the work concentrated to certain employees versus others? And do they need to be? And do they want to be? It could be more evenly distributed so that not one person is taking on everything as they're interacting with your base. And then also allowing it to sort of the stress not be so concentrated for any one individual, but to really increase that collaboration, make the emotional labor more collaborative, can go a long way to avoiding burnout.
Anyone else want to chime in on best practices for staving off or taking care of burnout?
Yeah, I can add one. So we had been starting on this journey pre-COVID that We typically were a very high safety culture environment that we started with a safety moment. We started moving that into an inclusion moment as we tried to continue to push our culture. And so it's allowed for conversations about how are you doing, and so we have put resources out of what is burnout and what are the signs of it. Because I do think people need to be educated of the fact that if you find yourself just not as interested in the work that you're doing, not able to sleep, all those clinical signs of it, you have to ask yourself that question. I've also done things like just putting a question out to start with our team meetings of what brings you joy. There's a great podcast by Brene Brown recently who talked about like the antidote to just the fact that you do not have the same mental capacity you used to because the world is heavy right now is play and fun. And we don't do that together, but how do you encourage, what did you do today? And did you go out in nature? Did you laugh with your kids? Did you bake a cake? I mean, like, whatever it is, but how do you just remind people that they have that taking time for joy can give you energy?
That is a wonderful, wonderful recommendation and a great thing to leave off on because we are just about out of time here. So I'm going to invite Steve to come on, but thank you all for being with me today. It's been a terrific discussion.
That was a great note to end on, joy. Thank you, Lydia, and our very insightful and engaging speakers, Judith, Ellen, Mike, Pranesh, and Robert. That was a great conversation on the way so many of us are working today. Thanks also to our partner, Culture Amp, and to all of you in the audience for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our forthcoming webinars. I'll mention a couple. Next Thursday, November 12th, expanding on what we explored today, we'll be looking at improving communication in a remote workforce. And on Tuesday, November 17th, we'll be doing our fourth full-scale virtual conference with panel discussions, workshops, and networking. The focus is on supporting families, how employers can help workers in challenging times. Visit our website at fromday1.co to learn more. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.